Hello, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name's Brewer. I've basically been a nurse for 10 years and I've always had a special interest in working in developing countries, tropical diseases and expeditions. I'd always wanted to work in Africa, but until last year had never really had the opportunity to do so. I was lucky enough to spend 4 months of last year working in the Billy Riordan Memorial Clinic. This is in fact the clinic that we're going to be giving the profits of tonight's showing to. Obviously it's something very close to my heart and I wanted to tell you a little bit more about the clinic and the work that goes on there. This clinic for me also has a slightly more personal feel to it because actually a friend of mine knew Billy. Billy was actually an Irish boy who was living out in the village of Cape Maclear, and unfortunately in 1999 he drowned in the lake. His mother went out to sort of see where Billy had been living before he died, to find out why he had been so in love with this place. His mother basically also fell in love with the village and decided that she wanted to do something for the people there, and found out that they had no kind of health facility and their nearest clinic was about 45 minutes by a dirt road. She's basically dedicated the rest of her life to raising money, which she spent 2 years doing when she raised enough funds to actually build a physical clinic, and she now fundraises globally to be able to carry on the clinic and the work that goes on there. So just for a bit of a history on Malawi itself, Malawi is an amalgamation of different tribes, and many of them have migrated from both north and south. Unfortunately, many Malawians were taken up to an island called Zanzibar and used in the African slave trade, mainly going over to the Arabian area. One of the most famous explorers to reach there was David Livingstone in 1859. In 1891, Malawi actually became part of the British colonies, and in 1964 they gained their independence. Malawians are known as some of the friendliest people in Africa, but also unfortunately one of the poorest countries in the world. They also have one of the highest HIV rates. The village I was based in is actually on the southern shores of the lake, and as you might be able to see on the map, a little place called Monkey Bay. We were in a village just next door to that called Cape Maclear. You can see here, this is a picture of the Billy Riordan Memorial Clinic. This is just the front part of it. The clinic was basically open from 8 in the morning till 12 and 2 in the afternoon till 4. It was run almost like a GP surgery rather than anything else. However, we did have a 24-hour emergency facility. So if anybody was taken sick or had problems in the night, they would either come up to the clinic, or we also ran a small satellite clinic out of the accommodation that we were living in. They would come up, they would register at the front. We would have people outside who'd be able to prioritise those who were sicker. Everybody would be weighed and their temperature taken, and if necessary they were brought in for immediate treatment. Most of the doctors and nurses who worked in the clinic were Westerners. As it's an Irish charity, majority were actually from Ireland. However, there were a few British, a couple of Dutch people there as well. What you can see in front of you is just one of the doctor's rooms. That's one of our doctors there, Sarah, waiting for patients to come in. This is the nursing treatment room. So what we would have is we would be administering medicines and basic treatments there. Also, 3 afternoons a week we ran a dressing clinic as well. So people would come in to have their dressings done and changed. We also had a small pharmacy out the back, which we'll see photos of in a second. So the doctors and nurses were mainly Western. However, the clinic itself does employ many people within the village. It's actually trained people up to do different jobs as well. So there were many opportunities for the villagers. They've actually trained 3 people up to be a lab technician and to be able to diagnose HIV, malaria, and TB as well. There were also translators, healthcare assistants, People also got training in HIV counselling and did a lot of work within that. You could also see just the other jobs within it were like gardeners, cleaners, things like that. As you can see, here's a picture of our pharmacy. Quite basic, but we still actually had a really good selection of medications compared to most of the clinics in Africa. Most of the clinics in this area anyway. We had to, as part of our introduction, actually go and work in a big rural hospital in the capital. And having compared what we had in our clinic to what they actually had in the major city hospitals, we were incredibly fortunate. Most of the medicines that we had there, we actually had to buy within Malawi, and some of them luckily were donations that came over from either Britain or Ireland. The government actually supplied some of the medication. Also, there were free medications which had been given to the country of Malawi by the Bill Gates Trust. He's actually raised money to give malaria treatment, a thing called LAR, which is free for all Malawians, and I'm sure is probably the same in other African countries as well. So our role not only was as nurses, but also sort of as pharmacists as well. We had to bag up the medications, give out the medications, and try to explain it for our translators about what people should take. This is our close observation ward. As you can see, we basically had 2 adult beds. We also had 2 children's cots. So the government had basically said that we were a facility that shouldn't have people for more than 48 hours. We weren't seen as a hospital, we were seen as a clinic. So if we felt that we could get people better, that they'd actually be able to go home within 48 hours, we were allowed to keep them in this room. However, if we felt we weren't going to be able to get them better in 48 hours, then we had to, via our ambulance, transfer them to the nearest hospital, which was about 45 minutes drive along a dirt track. So quite often, especially with problems like malaria, which was a major issue, actually, if you do treat people, even if they're very, very sick, they can recover very quickly and actually be able to leave the facility. So here we are just bagging up some of the medicines. Here's me and Erno, one of the other local workers. This is our emergency room. So we actually had, again, better facilities than a lot of the local hospitals. We actually had a defibrillator. We had 3 oxygen cylinders, we had a full obstetrics bed, and loads of other emergency equipment. So again, we did have a few incidents while I was there, a chap who'd been stabbed 15 times and was just delivered in the middle of the night to our front doorstep. Also, obviously, pregnant ladies giving birth in the middle of the night, other people who are really sick, and they'd be brought up to this facility to try to stabilise them before we maybe moved them on to the next hospital. We also had another area and space which basically was more for day patients. So I'd say a vast majority of the people who turned up were children with high fevers and malaria. So what we would do is just keep them for the day, get their temperature down, make sure they weren't being sick, so they could actually take the treatment for malaria, and then they'd be discharged home. So here's one of our care assistants. Quite often it ended up children having to double up on beds and things, but there was a really good facility to make sure that they were well enough to be able to go home. So the clinic also did a feeding program, and here are some of the ladies queuing up to collect something called lacunipala, which is basically a type of flour which has loads of extra nutrients and vitamins and things in. So any children that we felt were sort of malnourished by a scale that's been set up by the UN, they would be entitled to this program. So twice a week they would come and collect the flour from us, and they'd be able to make this kind of paste porridge which they'd be able to feed to their children. This is just a picture of the mission statement of the trust. So it just sort of suggests about Mags, the lady that set it up, her passion for it and for the village herself. So here's just some pictures of all the guys who work there, and as you can see, sort of the majority of them, they are Malawian, and they're a very important part of the whole team and how the clinic worked. As you can see in this photo, there's the picture of our ambulance. The accommodation block behind is actually where we were living. So we were really lucky to have such a beautiful facility right on the edge of the lake. What we had down in this area was not only our accommodation where we lived, but also a small treatment room. So overnight, if anybody needed emergency treatment, they would come here, which was in the middle of the village. And we had a room which basically we could stabilise them in, get them in the vehicle up to the main clinic, and then stabilise them further there to be able to transfer them when it was safe to the nearest hospital. During the time that we were there was a real mix of seasons as well. I was actually there during the rainy season, which causes many problems, not only in the fact that there's a much higher prevalence of malaria, but also in the fact that actually we get isolated and cut off from the next nearest town, and it makes the roads impassable, which means that for potentially 1 or 2 months a year we actually have no way of getting out even to the other hospital facility. So for the people in the village, this clinic really has been a massive lifeline, that now they have access to healthcare, 365 days a year, rather than before where a lot of them couldn't even afford to get the transport to the next village. And for 2 months a year there was no way of getting there anyway because they were cut off by the rains. As you can see, what a beautiful place it is on the lake, and we were so lucky to give them the opportunity to work there and spend time with the villagers. We had to walk up from where we were living up to the clinic each day. Some photos of us just trudging through the mud to try and get up to the clinic. Village life was relatively simple. Most of the people in the village were fishermen or worked in some level of tourism. They tended to fish most of the day and then dry them out under the sun and then sell them on. So this is a picture of a bow tree, which is one of the most famous and recognisable symbols of Malawi. The board game which is on the table that's been brought in is called a bow game, and it's named after this tree because people tend to sit under this tree while playing the game, and it creates lots of shade and a really nice place in the community for people to sort of hang out. Weaving's one of the major things that the ladies of the village do. We were lucky enough to have the opportunity to go down into the village and have a bit of a weaving lesson from the ladies. One of their main sources of food is corn, and most of the farming around there was corn, so they would grow it for the year and then sort of keep it for their families to be able to either grind down and keep into a flour, which they made again into a kind of paste or a porridge, or something called nasima. Also, something that was trying to be started up while I was there was trying to run some satellite clinics to some smaller villages around the southern lake shores as well. There were 2 in particular, one called Kasanka, one called Masaka, which had no healthcare facilities at all. There were boats that came from those villages to our village, and quite often they would come and use our services. However, we were trying to find some way of subsidising their transport so people would have better access just to get to our clinic. So we went over there to the village to either see what could be done or how we could help out. We were also lucky enough to get invited to be involved in one of their dances, and I was lucky enough to get taken up to dance with the ladies of the village, much to the hilarity of the rest of the villagers. And the final photo is just of me and one of the other volunteers when we had an evening wearing a traditional Malawian dress. So now we've looked at most of the photos from my trip. I hope that this short talk has been useful in showing you where the profits from tonight's film are going to be going. If you've got any questions or you want to know more about the charity or the clinic itself, please do come and speak to one of us afterwards. I hope you enjoyed the film, and thank you very much for coming.